Okay, good morning, everyone. We are going to get started because it's 10 a.m. I want to welcome you all to our first Water Quality Wednesday webinar of 2024. The title for today's topic is the economics of conservation. So welcome, and we are going to get started with a quick poll question. So I'm going to launch that. And this is just to gauge who's with us today, as well as to get a baseline of where your knowledge levels are about our three main topics for today. So please go ahead and take a minute and answer that poll, and we will get started. So a couple events I want to mention while we're doing those poll questions before we get to our speakers. Our next two Water Quality Wednesday webinars will be in February and March. The 28th of February and the 27th of March at the same time as today's webinar. And those topics are going to be about water management techniques and cascading waterways. So if you're interested in attending either one of those, feel free to register at go.osu.edu/WQW24. And we'll be dropping these links in the chat box for you so you don't have to frantically write them down. So don't worry about that. And then also in February, we have our annual Certified Livestock Manager webinars. Those are bi-monthly. So every other month we host one of these webinars. And that one is going to focus on manure safety and emergency responses. These webinars were created in partnership with the Ohio Department of Agriculture and the CLM program to offer those continuous CEUs for our CLMs. So you can register for that at go.osu.edu/CLM. And we hope to see you at all three of those webinars. So statewide events that Extension has coming up, the Overholt Drainage School is a big one. It's super important for a lot of drainage installers, NRCS folks, soil and water staff. A big wide variety of folks can find value at this meeting. It's now a 4-day meeting instead of 5 days. And this year it will be hosted in Columbus. So if you want more information on that, you can hit go.osu.edu/ODS24. And then also our Conservation Tillage and Technology Conference is going to be hosted in Ada, Ohio at Ohio Northern University, March 12th and 13th. So for more info on that, you can visit ctc.osu.edu. Next, I wanted to talk a little bit about the water quality team. This is our 4th annual webinar series. And we couldn't do it without all of you giving us feedback on the topics, as well as joining us for the live and watching the recorded webinars. So I want to take a moment to introduce our team. First, we have our Williams, Fulton, and Lucas County position, and that is currently vacant. So if you're interested in joining our team, keep an eye out. We will be posting that position in the near future, and we would love to have a ton of folks apply for that. Next is myself. My name is Rachel Cochran, and I cover Paulding, Defiance, and Van Wert counties. Moving south, we have Jocelyn Burt. She covers Auglaize, Mercer, and Allen counties. Then we have Paige Garabrandt covering Putnam, Hancock, and Hardin counties. Matthew Romanko covering Crawford, Wyandotte, Seneca, Sandusky, and Erie counties. And Amber Emmons covering Henry, Wood, and Ottawa counties. The 6 of us are based up here in the Western Lake Erie Basin of Northwest Ohio, but we do also have statewide responsibilities. So don't be shy and feel free to reach out if you're outside of this area of the state. We'd be happy to work with you. So you can visit us and see what kind of resources we have to share and what kind of work we're doing at waterqualityextension.osu.edu. So for today's webinar, we have 3 speakers focusing on the economics of conservation. We have Katie Welts-Johnson from the University of Minnesota, Clint Schrader from Ohio State University, and Glenn Arnold from the Ohio State University. So I'm going to turn it over to Katie right now. So I'm going to stop my screen share. We'll let her get hers pulled up. And I'll go ahead and introduce her. So Katie is an extension economist with the Center for Farm Financial Management at the University of Minnesota, and she's going to talk about cover crops today. So it's often encouraged that farmers adopt climate smart practices such as cover crops and reduce tillage, but these practices affect farm finances. How and to what extent? She's going to talk about that. So she's going to use FinBin data to present the managerial and economic reasons that farmers might be hesitant to adopt cover crops, as well as the impact of using cover crops and economics. So with that, I'll turn it over to Katie.
All right, thanks, Rachel. Yeah, as Rachel said, we are going to talk about money today and cover crops. I think that I get this request often. I think it's a topic everyone's interested in, right? Everyone wants to know, what's it going to take? How are my cover crops going to not necessarily make money, but I don't want to lose money if I'm doing cover crops. So very excited to be with you today. Feel free to jot down questions, throw them into the chat. I'm happy to answer questions a little bit later. I think we have a Q&A at the end, Rachel mentioned. So absolutely take notes, write questions down, and yeah, let me know if anything comes up. So as Rachel said, my name is Katie. I am an economist. I work for the Center for Farm Financial Management, which is a subset out of the University of Minnesota. So very excited to be with you today. A little bit of background about me before we dive in, just to kind of set this stage. So I grew up, and I still currently live in Western Minnesota. I grew up on my family's crop farm, and from there I went to the University of Minnesota, both for my undergrad degree in ag business, and then I also have a master's degree in applied economics. As I said, I grew up on a farm. We grow corn, soybeans, and sugar beets. I'm still very involved in my family's farm. And essentially, what got me interested in the cover crop conservation realm is that when I grew up, went to the University of Minnesota for my undergrad degree, and then I took a gap year and I worked full-time on my family's farm before going back to grad school. And in that gap year, I was working on my family's farm, and we were looking at kind of incorporating more conservation practices into our farm. So we essentially are a very conventional farm. We used conventional tillage systems. So we would do a full ripping in the fall, and then in the spring we'd come back and dig our ground before then planting into it. And we were really wanting to move more towards strip till. No-till just doesn't quite work as well on our ground. We thought strip tillage could be a good kind of happy medium for us. And there was a fair amount of, data out there on how strip till was really going to impact or not impact like yields and stuff like that. And we felt pretty confident that even if we did have a little bit of a yield hit with our strip tillage, we felt like we would make up for that or be fine, because we'd be saving on fuel and time and stuff like that with the strip till compared to our conventional tillage system. So that was back in 2018, and we slowly started to convert some of our land into strip tillage. And now I'd say we're probably at about 95% of the farms or the fields that we farm, we strip till. So pretty excited about strip till, but at the time when we were looking at that, we were also wanting to incorporate cover crops, and we struggled because there really wasn't any economic data about cover crops that at least that we could find that was useful for us, really showing us what that move was going to do. If we added cover crops, how was our bottom line going to be impacted? And essentially, yeah, there was not much info out there. So we did not incorporate cover crops. And actually, so I was back in 2018. We just now this past fall of 2023 planted our first little trial, I should say, on our farm of cover crops to see how they would work. So we've been a lot slower to adopt cover crops. And I think that that's a common story amongst a lot of producers throughout the US. It's hard to make decisions without data. So that's really what got me interested in this world. So then when I went on to the U of M for my master's degree in economics, I studied cover crop economics as my thesis topic because, it's a real question. And I think a lot of farms have that question. And I don't know that we're going to see a lot of adoption or a large amount of adoption of cover crops throughout the country unless we find some of these answers. So let's just a little bit of background on me. I also am married to a dairy farmer. So we are definitely busy on the farm, between my family's farm and his family's farm, but it's a fun life. So a lot of my farming experience has really informed my job, and kind of vice versa. What I do for a living helps to inform our farm too. So I'm an economist at the Center for Farm Financial Management, and this is our mission statement here. I just highlighted kind of the key takeaway. Our mission is really to improve the farm financial management and marketing abilities of producers. So really helping farmers become better managers and better marketers. And we do that through creating tools and trainings, essentially. So we have quite a few tools, software, websites, and then deliver a lot of trainings really focused on farm financial management and then business management and marketing. Just to highlight some of our tools before we really get into this cover crop stuff, just because I think these are useful for farmers. So if you're a producer or if you're an educator that works with producers or something like that, these can all be useful. We have a suite of planning tools. So Ag Plan is a business planning tool, especially if a farm is a new farm or making a big transition. It's really important to have a plan of the direction you're headed. And, especially if you're trying to get financing or funding from a lender, having that business plan is really, really helpful. So we have Ag Plan, which is a free online business planning resource. Right below that, I listed Ag Transitions. It's very similar to Ag Plan, but it's a transition planning tool. It's, again, an online resource. So essentially helping a business transition from one generation to the next or from one owner to the next. Also super helpful, when you're for farms going in to meet with a lawyer or something like that, it can get really expensive really quick. So Ag Transitions helps to kind of speed up that process and think through some of those transition planning questions before you really get into the lawyer. We also have a suite of financial tools, which I will get into a little bit more in depth in a couple minutes. We also offer informational tools. So Farm Answers is an online resource that it's essentially compiling a bunch of different fact sheets, webinars, stuff like that have been created by universities all throughout the US, and it's all put into Farm Answers. So someone can go into Farm Answers and search this one-stop shop for resources about anything from livestock production to strawberry production or anything in between. Cover crops is also a topic in Farm Answers as well. And then we have a suite of grain marketing tools too. So I just wanted to highlight those really quick. All of these tools are free except for our financial analysis software, which is called FinPack, which I'll talk about in a minute. But again, these are helpful if not a sales pitch necessarily, but just they're free. Use them. We have them available. We've heard, lots of positive feedback from all of them. So to access those, you can go to our Center for Farm Financial Management website, which the URL is there at the bottom, cffm.umn.edu, and there's a tools tab at the top of the page. So if you just click on tools, you'll see the links to those tools all right there. Okay, so FinPack, I talked about it. This is kind of setting the stage for the data that we're going to look at when we're talking about these cover crop economics. And so FinPack is a financial analysis software package that we created specifically for agricultural use, but it has moved into, we do offer a commercial package as well. And essentially FinPack answers these three financial questions. So where am I at financially? Where's my farm at? Where do I want to be? And then, how am I going to get there? So we can create these financial statements using FinPack. So the balance sheet is essentially, it's looking at, these are my assets, what do I own? And then what do I owe money on? And then what's in between? So what are my assets? What are my liabilities? And how, what's the difference there? The balance sheet with that, outlook is really asking that question, where am I currently at, right? What is my financial situation right now? And then as we look through some of these sheets here, like the cash flow is really going to help us look forward to say, okay, where am I going to be a year from now? What's my financial picture going to look like? What changes do I need to make? Doing some of those projections as well. The one statement that I do want to highlight is in the middle, financial analysis. That's a tool that we can use in FinPack to look backwards and say, how did I do last year? Did I make money? Were there certain things that I produced that I did better on? Or were there certain, we have did my soybeans do better? Did my corn do better, etc. Really looking back at my financial performance. So using FinPack, we have a couple different user groups. So first off is producers. So producers are able to purchase FinPack and just use it on their own if they're comfortable making those financial statements on their own. We do have some FinPack training that they can attend, but so producers can do that on their own. We also have a larger group of educators that are working with producers to make those statements. So Clint is going to talk, when I finish up, I believe Clint is going to go ahead and talk about the farm management program in Ohio. But just a quick overview, essentially, these are educators that work generally through college or through technical and community colleges. But rather than being an instructor and having students come in for like formal classroom setting instruction, these instructors are going out to meet one-on-one with farmers to put together those financial statements and do a more in-depth analysis of, hey, here's where your farm is at, here's where you could be, and here are the steps you need to take to get there. So that's our educator group. And then we also do have a group of lenders that use FinPack to analyze farm loans as well. A key thing to note is that we do not collect any data from our producer group or from the lender group. However, we have certain benchmarking programs, educators who contribute to our FinBin database. So FinBin is an online farm financial database. It's the largest publicly farm financial database available in the world. And it's available, the URL is there at the bottom, finbin.umn.edu. So just as we store grain in a grain bin, we store our financial data in what we call FinBin. FinBin, there are, I believe, 13 states nationwide that are currently contributing to FinBin. We get approximately 3,500 farms annually that contribute data. I will say it is pretty Midwestern heavy. So of that 3,500, probably 2,200 to 2,400 of them are from Minnesota specifically. So it is a Minnesota specific or a Minnesota heavy database. However, it's still helpful in seeing any financial queries that you'd like to run. Ohio is a contributor of data. So you are able to go in here and run a query specifically on Ohio data too. All of this data is anonymous. It's also summary data. So there's no like single identifiers or anything like that, really to protect those who are contributing data into this database. Certain things I will say too, so this is a helpful resource if you want to look at certain searches, such as what are the cost and returns of soybeans based on tillage type. You can do some of those searches, or looking at what are the cost and returns of a dairy farm based on herd size. And we'll be able to, FinBin will pull that data out for you so you can see specifically, based on certain enterprises, or we have special sorts that you can look at, such as cover crops, manure applications, etc. So getting into more specifically our cover crop project. So back when, again, I said my family was looking into having cover crops in 2018, well, there was no data for us. And that's what I found even in grad school. I discovered this FinBin database, which is such a cool resource, like a diamond of a resource for farmers who are looking at financial kind of decisions to make, except in FinBin still in 2018, 2019, there really wasn't a great amount of resources or a great amount of information that we could pull from FinBin. So FinBin has kind of reworked itself in the last handful of years and really underwent this whole new change. So we can collect a lot more data or analyze a lot more cover crop specific financial data. In 2021, we at the Center for Farm Financial Management partnered with our Minnesota Farm Business Management Program and with the Environmental Defense Fund to create this cover crop project where we're specifically going to look at the kind of financial implications of cover crops over a period of 3 years. So we started in 2021 and it will go until 2025, I believe is the last year. So just a couple demographics of our cover crop group. There were 121 farms total that we consider in this group. These farms are going to be contributing data for 3 years. So there were 83 farms that contributed data in 2022. Another 38 are going to join that group to contribute data in 2023. And then of those farms, we resulted in 195 fields. So that would be like if I, as a farmer, have multiple cover crop fields, that's how we get 121 farms that create 195 fields. One thing I will say too of this data, so our analysis season is right now, is our heavy season. So we have instructors out working with farms to collect their financial data from 2023. We will get that data in March of 24, kind of analyze it and send out a new kind of report and update FinBin in March/April of 2024. So today I'm going to be talking a lot about 2022 data, which seems a little bit outdated because it is 2024, except we're still working through our 23 data currently. We'll get that out in the next few months. So comparing our cover crop group to the average Minnesota farm, I think a lot of times, and I'm guilty of this too, it's easy to assume that some of these cover crop growers are maybe smaller farms. They might be doing some like odd practices or something like that. So it's really interesting to compare our cover crop group in Minnesota to the rest of the state. Because what we found is that their total crop acres, the cover crop group was slightly smaller, but just slightly smaller. So the cover crop group averaged 770 acres per farm versus all of Minnesota. The rest of our database for Minnesota averaged just over 800. So really not a huge size difference in the grand scheme of things between these two groups. Also looking at years of experience, these two groups were averaged the exact same age and the exact same years farming. So again, fairly similar in terms of their experience. The net farm income, again, very close between our cover crop group and the rest of the state of Minnesota. Net worth, the cover crop group averaged $2.1 million versus the rest of the state averaged $2.3 million. So again, fairly similar. And then also looking into some of these efficiency ratios, again, these two groups are just very, very similar. What we can take away from this is that, looking at the rest of the data that I will show, our cover crop group isn't some like odd subset of the rest of our database. It is basically a very similar group compared to the database. So cover crop costs, looking at what was reported in 2022, what we saw is that essentially they vary significantly based on the purpose of the cover crop. So we wrote a report that goes in depth into each of these expense items, but currently looking at this table, we're just looking at the total direct expense of the cover crop. So this is not the expense of, corn or soybeans tied to a cover crop, but this is specifically the direct expense for the cover crop. The direct expense includes items such as seed, fertilizer, chemical, fuel and oil, repairs, and custom hire. In the report that we wrote, we do go into more detail about, again, each of those specific expenses, so seed, fertilizer, etc. But here, just for the purpose of time on this slide, I wanted to kind of lump it all together to look at total direct expenses. What we can see, so I have, each species kind of separated out. So you can see rye silage, cover crop forage, etc. But then in that darker gray column, I did kind of I grouped them all together to get the average of all species. What we can see is we have a minimum direct expense per acre of $14 and a maximum direct expense of $310 across all species. So that's quite the range, right? From $14 to $310. What you see though, if you look over into the more detailed by species columns, Our more expensive cover crops are essentially those that are being used for feed purposes. So that rye silage, forage, the cover crop rye mix, etc. A little bit more complicated. If you're looking for just like an average ballpark number, we found that we had a medium across all species of $52 per acre and an average of 74. So probably looking in that $50 to $75 range per acre for cover crop expenses total, but that also, again, includes seed, it includes fuel, it includes any repairs that they allocated toward the cover crop enterprise. When we look at our gross return compared to our total direct expenses, again, this is just for 2022, so you can't really draw any strong conclusions, but there's two things that really stand out to me. Just when you're looking at this, our gross return specifically for that cover crop is in the dark blue, and then the direct expense is in the light blue. What stands out is that the least expensive cover crop to plant, or species to plant, was really rye, and we saw this. I think this is seen in a lot of studies. It's again verified in this database. Our rye enterprise was the cheapest to plant, or the cheapest enterprise to grow. However, it also had the lowest gross return out of any of these. The second thing I want to point out is that the only enterprise, or the only species that actually had a higher gross return than expense, was that rye silage. We did get close in a couple other enterprises, but really the species that are going to be the most profitable are those that are used for feeding purposes. Whether it's being grazing or a forage, really that feeding aspect adds a lot. So that was kind of cover crop specific costs and returns. Now we also have the ability in Finman to compare the cover crop with the crop that it's following, or that will follow it. So for example, here we're looking at corn. So this would be the cover crop was planted in the fall of 2021, and then the corn was grown in 2022. So we're looking at how did that cover crop impact the corn? Did it impact the corn? So this table can be a little bit confusing, so I want to walk through it first, and then we'll get into kind of the results that we're looking at. So kind of in the center here, we have our cover crop group. And then, so each of these columns is all associated with the cover crop group. So the first would be corn that's grown after the cover crop. So this is just the corn column. So the average yield on the corn for this cover crop group was 199 bushels per acre, etc. So this is just the corn column. Next, we have the cover crop only column. So again, looking at, we had a gross return of $28 per acre for that cover crop, but the total expense was $76 per acre. So they netted a loss of $47. So that's just for the cover crop in the cover crop group. Then we combine those two columns and have this corn and cover crop combined to look at their total impact together. And then this last column, again, is for the cover crop group, but this is cornfields that did not have a cover crop on them. So this is saying, I grow cover crops on some of my fields, but not on all of them. So these would be the cornfields that I did not put a cover crop on. I'm still part of that cover crop group because I have cover crops on some of my fields, but not on all of them. So basically we wanted to compare, how is our cover crop group doing in general compared to the average or the rest of the state of Minnesota. This is looking at corn in southern Minnesota. So we had enough data to kind of split the state in half. Our growing conditions are very different in northern Minnesota versus southern Minnesota. The growing season is much shorter in northern Minnesota. It's, it gets warm later and it cools down faster or earlier. So they just have a lot less time. So it's not necessarily fair to look at Minnesota state as a whole, but so we split it into two halves here. Some key findings when we look at this, and what we saw in southern Minnesota with corn, is that essentially our cover crop group and our non-cover crop group had similar gross returns. It was slightly less for that cover crop group, but overall fairly similar. The cover crop group did actually have lower total expenses even after the cover crop cost was combined. However, it just wasn't quite enough, so they did end up with a 2% lower net return on their cover crop fields compared to the rest of the state. When we look at soybeans in southern Minnesota, we actually see a more bleak picture. the soybean cover crop fields had a lower gross return of 11%. And then add that lower gross return to a 12% higher total expense, including the cover crop expense. Really, they ended up with a 50% less net return on their cover crop fields. So not such a great picture for soybeans in southern Minnesota in 2022. But then when we look at wheat, and this one we're looking at the entire state, we didn't have quite enough data to separate out north from south. Looking at wheat, our cover crop fields actually did fairly well compared to the rest of the state. So they had a 14% higher gross return. And then their expenses were actually similar even after the cover crop cost. So putting those two things together gave us 75% higher net return on those wheat fields, on the cover crop wheat fields compared to the rest of the state in 2022. So kind of, I know I went through that really quick and I'm happy to answer questions afterwards, but I think just a few key takeaways from this data that I presented is first and foremost, this is just 1 year's worth of data. We are planning on doing this study, like I said, for an additional few years. So we're hoping to draw stronger conclusions and to maybe start to see some trends and analysis there. But essentially, that's what we saw in 2022. We really can't make strong conclusions from that, other than you could maybe see some average cost and returns of certain species of cover crops, etc. I'm excited to see what data we get come in March of 2020, looking at the 2023 data. I think that will be very interesting to kind of compile both 22 and 2023. But for now, we just have that 1 year. I think another cool takeaway is just the general fact that this data is being collected. This is farm reported data. It is, field scale, farm level. It's not experimental data. It's not plots. We're not just running trials or anything like this. Like, this is field scale farm level data. So it's very cool to actually have this work being done. I think as a farmer, it means a lot to look at farm level data rather than experiments or anything like that. So stick around, come back for more. And essentially, we view our job as just helping farmers make informed decisions. So we're not necessarily trying to steer anyone one direction or another, but really just trying to provide the data for farmers so that they can make confident and informed decisions for their farms. So with that, Rachel, I don't know if we have any time for questions or if you want to just move right into Clint and we can do questions at the end.
Yeah, I think we're gonna wait till the very end to do questions. Thank you so much, Katie. That was super informational. And I think there already are a few questions coming in. So any questions for Katie, please enter those in the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. I forgot to mention that before, but we'll handle all the questions through Q&A at the very end. So now we'll turn it over to Clint Schrader. He is the program manager for OSU's Farm Business Analysis Program. And today he's going to talk to you all about how his team can serve you and how we can get that same type of data that Katie discussed today for Ohio farms. So with that, we'll turn it over to Clint.
All right, thanks, Rachel. So yeah, as the program manager for Ohio Farm Business Analysis and Benchmarking, we work hand in hand with University of Minnesota. As Katie mentioned, our data is submitted to that FinBin database. There's also several resources we try to utilize here within the state, but this program has really been going on for quite a long time. We found records back to 1940 of the Farm Business Management Program here in Ohio. Through the 1980s, I think the FinPack software that we use, that Katie referenced, came out in 1983, if I remember correctly. And as she mentioned, there's different ways every state does it. Here within Ohio, we utilize the extension agency and run it through extension. At one time, there was trained instructors in the joint vocational schools that used to do a farm analysis. And I even last week I was talking at a meeting and a guy came up and said, "Yo, yeah, 1989, I was doing farm analysis at this joint vocational school." He's like, "I wondered what ever happened to that." So it's been around for a long time, and I think it's really been underutilized here in Ohio as far as what we can do with it. Um, so Kay, you talked a little bit about, what the goals are, but in Ohio, these are kind of the things that we want to answer. And these are just kind of general and maybe not necessarily pertaining as much to cover crops, but, was my farm profitable? Which enterprises were profitable, whether you own crops and livestock, and you want to look at, just the crops on their own and kind of separate those out, or maybe the livestock, and try and make decisions for your operation going forward. We also look at land tenure, so own ground, rented, share rented acres. And then cropping practices is where we're going to spend a lot of our time here in the coming years, hopefully finding some of these cover crop producers and those type of enterprises and really differentiating those from just maybe a more conventional corn. And we can look at a lot of different things, as I'll show you a little bit later on here. The other thing that I think is really of value for farmers, when you're talking to a farmer is in row crop production, and we're talking cost per cost of production, it always comes up as a per acre number. You said, okay, my seed cost last year for my corn acres was $110 an acre. And we have that mindset of what's my cost per acre, but then we turn around and we sell our products on a per bushel basis. And so I think that's another way where we have some value is we look at those costs in all manners. So we look at our per acre cost. We also look at our per bushel cost. If you're growing feed or other crops on a per ton basis, livestock on a per head or hundredweight produced, like if you're a dairy producer. And so we really can kind of help look at that number a couple of different ways, and that I think can be helpful. When it comes to your marketing strategy, how do we sell that item that we're producing, and do we know our cost of production in those same units? How does my farm perform compared to previous years? So this is where we're building that trend line over time of if a farm participates for a number of years, we can see the direction of their financial health, or we can see, the trends over time. And then how does my farm compare to other farms? So we publish our Ohio specific data. We put out benchmarking reports. That data is also then submitted again anonymously to the FinBin database. And so it gives farmers an opportunity to compare themselves against other Ohio farms. If we have enough farms of a certain size or whatever the data set might be, we can sort that data down into, say just farms in Northwest Ohio, or, whatever we want to look at is as long as we have enough farms participating with enough data. So a lot of different ways we can utilize that to make decisions. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how the analysis is done. I know we've got some cover crop or some farmers that are utilizing cover crops or regenerative ag practices. And, I'd really hope we could maybe get some of you involved to get some of these numbers for Ohio, similar to what Katie was showing there. But, what the process is we're going to need two balance sheets. We're going to need one at the beginning of the year and one at the end of the year. And as Katie mentioned, we are essentially operating a year behind. It's 2024 right now. We're doing the 2023 calendar year analysis. So we would need that balance sheet from the beginning of 2023, a balance sheet from the end of 2023, so that January 1st, 2024. And then we're going to look at what happened in between. And this is generally that Schedule F tax information, but really what was our cash income and expenses? Did we have any, big ticket capital purchase items or sales maybe? How did we change our depreciation? We standardized that across all the farms. We're not looking at that bonus depreciation or the 179 number that you would maybe use for tax reasons. We're going to standardize that over what we consider to be the life of the equipment. And then the other thing that we're looking at is annual inventory changes. How much grain was in storage, how much, herbicide or chemicals did you have in your shop getting ready for the next year that were prepaid. And so that's kind of the quick and easy way to explain it, but diving a little bit into the detail, this is where we get into what we call the whole farm analysis. That's just where, you give us your tax return and it comes up with a number on your tax return of, okay, my seed cost last year was 37,259. And we can just enter that in and be done. And that gives us a whole farm. But if we want to go that next step, we need to break that number down into the different components. And so this is kind of a detail screen where now we're looking at, okay, we had some costs for soybean seed treatment. In this particular year, they were paying the 2020 seed bill, but then also prepaying, it looks like maybe the 2021 bill. And so this is where we start into that enterprise analysis and really diving into those details. The next thing that we do is then we start allocating those, again, across those crops so that we're dividing that up, getting it into the appropriate crop. And that is going to really lend itself into that cover crop discussion is, what expenses belong to the cover crop? What expenses need to go to that cash crop that's associated with it, and trying to get that comparison so that we're comparing, maybe apples to apples. And so that's what we kind of do there. The last thing that we do for this part is what we call our overhead allocation. So you have fuel and oil, our overhead repairs type items, and we're going through and trying to allocate those to the different acreages or different crops that we're growing, to again, kind of make that apples to apples comparison. And then this is where we kind of dive into that enterprise analysis. So this is what it would look like. I've got on the left-hand side of the screen there, we've got a farm that was growing some soybeans and then growing some rye. And this is kind of how we would tag it so that those operations get married together. So in column number 5 at the very bottom of the screen, it's cut off, but we combine that with enterprise number 4. And so this gives us the chance to look at those separately, but then as Katie was kind of showing us, combine those together and say that, okay, these soybeans were grown after the cereal rye. And so we see an income, or we've got bushels, we've got a price, and we've got income on the soybeans, but then that 12,325 there at kind of the bottom of the screen, that would be income that this farm maybe received, so like a cost share payment. And I think this is where in Ohio we've got a lot of these acres that are utilizing a cost share payment of some sort, whether it's H2 Ohio, maybe EQIP or other factors. And so we want to look at that income. And so if we bring that in to maybe offset some of those costs that we talked about earlier, like our seed cost, what's the impact of that on that operation's profitability when it comes to growing cover crops? In the middle of the screen just gives us another idea of all the different options we have for analyzing those enterprise or different practices that they're using. And then on the right, we've got even more where we can click on and go into our checkbox. And the way that this data is then used is later I can, run a query on this, and I want to compare soybeans that were planted in 15-inch rows to those that were maybe planted in 30-inch rows. And as long as we've selected these for all the soybeans grown, I can start to pull up these different practices or these different on-farm management styles and try and understand, how did those impact profitability in a given year. Farms that participate, this is kind of the summary that they get back. So this is, a screenshot from 2023, but nothing's really changed. We've got our summarized income statement there on the left, really kind of looks at that crop sales, those things that happen throughout the year. On the right, we've got our Farm Financial Standards Council key measures. So the Farm Financial Standards Council has what we're calling the Farmer's Dozen, 13 different measures of farm profitability. These are things that lenders are going to be looking at. For example, we've got solvency there, our debt to asset ratio, and understanding what that means for your operation is certainly important, especially if you're working with a lender that's keeping track of those things. On the bottom, we've got in the red there the accuracy checks, and this is something that I really want to mention because, especially when it comes to cover crops and doing an analysis on profitability, there are so many times where the pictures may be incomplete or we're missing some things. And so all of the data that Katie had shared earlier and anything that we do here in Ohio, it's subject to some pretty hard or harsh accuracy checks. For us in Ohio, you need to have a cash discrepancy of less than $5,000 or 1% of cash discrepancy to gross revenue. And so when we think about a farm, every dollar that comes in, every dollar that comes out really needs to be accounted for. And that buffer is $5,000. So we could have $5,000 missing, from one direction or the other to still be in there. But, in this particular example, a farm that has a gross farm income of $831,000, $5,000 can kind of slip through the cracks sometimes, depending on how things are purchased or, it's easy to maybe lose track. And so that's where our program really, I think, thrives, is because we do have that high level of scrutiny and that we need to stick to. And so another thing that the farmer is going to get back are these financial standards graphics. And we can see there on the left, we've got like the blue trend line that kind of shows this particular farm's working capital to gross revenue. And so we can see that over time it improved, it kind of leveled back off. But then we've got the description there in the text box, our working capital to gross revenue, measuring the operating capital available against the size of the business, and then how we calculate that. And then on the bottom, we've got this evaluation scale. So strong is greater than 30. Caution is 30 to 10, vulnerable less than 10. And so this particular farm is coming in, it looks like about a 90 in this given year. And so we know that that's definitely a farm that's strong in that category. But you'll get these kind of graphics back for all of those Farm Financial Standard Council key measures. And this is where the benchmarking data comes into play. And so here's kind of a small example. There's 38 different categories on an enterprise analysis that we run a benchmark on. And so the sheet gets pretty, the type's pretty small in the time, so I just included a smaller screenshot so that we could see. But in this particular instance, this farm grew corn that was 180 bushels per the acre. That put them in the 60th percentile, and so that cell is highlighted there in the yellow. And that means that 40% of the farms achieved a higher yield. Then we look at our value, and so they marketed their grain for $3.70 a bushel, putting them in that 50th percentile. And so, half the farms achieved a higher yield or higher price, excuse me. And then our gross return, $666. Put us again back in that 60th percentile. And so we have this is, the income side, but for all of those direct expenses, our fuel, our fertilizer, our seed, we have this similar information on the screen, and you can utilize that for your farm to, again, cells that are highlighted closer to the right are areas that you're strong in. The closer we are to the left-hand side is maybe an area that we need to improve, or maybe something happened that year that you had high costs in a certain area. And so this is what a farm would get back. Farms that want to see this data, we have that available on our website, which is farmprofitability.osu.edu. And so you can go to our website, and we have our most recent summaries available there to kind of give you an idea of what the numbers say for Ohio. And I guess I just wanted to close with that's, my contact information. If you're interested in participating, you can also find us on social media. And this is our group that we just went through a training. And so we put this team together to, work on analysis throughout the state of Ohio. And so across the state, we do have trained professionals that would be willing to work with you. Or you can reach out to me directly if this is something that you think would be beneficial to your operation or maybe help drive some of that conversation on cover crop economics here in the state of Ohio, as we really would like to start growing that data set so we can have the data available similar to what Katie was sharing for Minnesota. So that's all I've got, Rachel. And if there's questions, again, please put them in that Q&A and we'll get to them at the end here.
Thank you, Clint. So for anyone who wants to reach out to Clint, his email is schrader.307@osu.edu. And I put the farm profitability website link in the chat box. So now we will turn it over to our last speaker, Glenn Arnold. He is an associate professor and field specialist for manure nutrient management here at The Ohio State University. And he's going to talk through some of his research with utilizing manure as a nutrient source and what the numbers have to say about it. So with that, we'll turn it over to Glenn.
All right, Rachel. Yeah, I'm going to spend some time today talking about some of the economics behind manure utilization. It's something we promote heavily in Ohio for a couple reasons. One, we want to capture the nutrients better. And secondly, we need to open up more days of time that we can apply manure. As farms get larger, we have more manure on one site. It just takes a much longer time to get that manure applied to fields. So generally in Ohio, rough estimates, probably about 80% of our fields just receive commercial fertilizer on a regular basis. You remove P2O5, you remove K2O5, and you can go to the agronomist crops books Ohio State has, and it'll tell you that corn takes out about 0.35 pounds of P2O5 per bushel, or soybeans take out 0.79 pounds per bushel. So you can look at those, get some numbers, and you can figure out how much you need to use to make it work. Manure generally has some costs, whereas commercial fertilizer is quick. Guy can do that 80-acre field in just a couple hours and be done with it. You won't even know that he was there. Liquid manure is different. It's a lot of water. Generally you're talking 92, 95, 97% water, very few solids in most liquid manures. So if you're close by, commercial manure applicators usually will charge about a penny per gallon to apply liquid manure. If they have to move their hoses and set them up to go further distances, then usually we look at maybe 2 cents, perhaps 3 cents to go a greater distance. And then if you're going to put manure in tankers, or if you're going to put them on semi trucks and haul them, then you start getting in even greater expenses. I've got down here 3 to 5 cents per gallon or more to make that happen. And that's just the way it is with our liquid manures. And solid manures, if you're looking at pen pack manure, some people might charge by the ton, people might charge for the hour. I picked these numbers up from the custom applicator chart. Ohio State always puts out a custom rate chart, thanks to people like Clint and others who put those together, Barry Ward. And then poultry litter. You've got your purchase, you've got your application costs. I threw a number out here of $35 per ton, but again, that can vary quite a bit from different parts of the states. Fall applied manure is generally the thing that we have most of, but probably is the least best use of manure. And this would just be a field that a dairy farmer is moving manure, so the commercial applicator did. And he did a really nice job, got pretty even coverage across the field. But and at this point, you're talking October, you're going to lose the moisture that was in the manure, which isn't that big of a deal for this farmer. And you'll lose a chunk of the nitrogen over the winter months. And again, if you're talking about dairy manure, a lot of times it doesn't have a lot in those outdoor ponds where they store them. So nutrient losses probably wouldn't be as great as one would think. And this field will be worked in, and you'll keep the phosphorus, you'll keep the potash, and it happens. Here'd be another example, fall application of manure. The person has knifed this in, done a nice job. You're going to get good absorption of the nutrients. But then how do you account for that the following year? Did you keep half of that nitrogen or 2/3 of the nitrogen? You know you kept the phosphorus, you know you kept the potash. They're put in the soil, they're in contact with the ground, they'll stay. And in those instances, farmers really need to consider looking at PSNT tests. This is the one that Purdue generated this chart, and we've been using this in Ohio for a number of years. Greg LaBarge has been doing some research up at Hoytville with it. And simply, you go in the spring when you're about to get ready to apply your side dress nitrogen to a field, and you basically take your soil probe and you go down 10 inches, collect those soil samples, and then send it in, get it back the next day, usually, on how much nitrate and nitrogen do you have in the field. That would be nitrogen left over from the previous year primarily. And if you have less than 10 parts per million, just looking at this chart, then you would use your normal rate of side dress fertilizer. So if your normal rate for your corn crop is 150 pounds, assuming you put in some row starter, then you would put that on. If, however, let's just say it came back at 18. Well, if it's at 18, then you can back off of your normal side dress nitrogen rate you would have used by 45 pounds per acre. So if it was 150, then you could probably do 105 pounds and get a similar yield response. And that's really what Greg has been doing with ours. We've knifed our manure in for three years in a row at Whiteville. Sometimes it was knifed in October, sometimes it was knifed in December. And if you apply the manure, once those soil temperatures have dropped below 50 degrees, just like anhydrous prefers, then you do slow down the bacteria, you do slow down the conversion of the manure over to other sources. So this is a handy chart. It seems like it proves pretty true for the research we've been doing. I know there's many farmers that I've encountered over the years that would put on a full rate of nitrogen the following year, even after fall manure application. And they're probably missing the boat quite a bit on what they could be saving on some of these fields. Poultry litter would be another example of a crop that we really don't capture it probably as fully as we will in the future, I think. Commonly, we put this out in the summertime. When you look at the nutrient value in poultry litter, and this is from Northwest Ohio, so this would be layers. When you look at that, we've got our three type, the total nitrogen is 58.7. And then that's made up of two other nitrogen numbers. One is going to be ammonium nitrogen, and the other one is organic nitrogen. So when you look at that, this manure test actually gives you a first year availability off to the right-hand side. And so you've got the 32.3 pounds of ammonium nitrogen is readily available the first year. And then they take about 2/3 or 60% at least of the organic nitrogen in poultry litter is considered available the first year. Available for a corn crop or a bean crop that's going to take most of the summer to develop, not necessarily for a wheat crop that would use all of its nitrogen in May and June and then not be seeking nitrogen when the ground's really finally warmed up good. So again, here we have a total nitrogen of 48.1 out of that sample. Then down here you have your P2O5, you have your K2O, and then even sulfur's listed down below that. When you think of sulfur, most of us have sulfur requirements on our soil tests when we get those, and we have to fill those out. I put some prices in for your P2O5 and your K2O and your nitrogen, and I think they're fairly conservative because nitrogen at one point was over $1 a pound early last year. But I put in 70 cents for nitrogen and 38 cents a pound for K2O and P2O5 at 63 cents. So when you look at this poultry sample, you've got about $32.26 worth of P2O5 and $16.99 worth of K2O in a ton of that poultry litter. And of course, there's the nitrogen. I didn't put a value on it because how much of it are we going to use with the crop? That's kind of an unknown. If we put that out there in the summertime, we get it incorporated, we get some rain on it, that ammonium nitrogen is going to grow something. It's going to grow some weeds, or it's going to grow whatever is available to uptake it and run with it, or cover crop for that matter. And this is generally how poultry litter is handled. We usually are using spreaders. We're getting in the dry form. Innovative Ag does a lot. Northwest Ag does a lot. There's several other companies that handle poultry litter in Ohio and different areas. And it's just a fairly dry product in the fact that it's about 1/3 solids, a little less than 2/3 moisture. And but it's much drier than what you have with your liquid manures. So the ability to transport this maybe 100 miles from its source is not unheard of, and that's fairly commonly done across. Again, here we are putting it out in the summertime or later in the fall. You can see the leaves are off the trees, and it'll stay there, it'll do a good job, but we really don't capture some of that nitrogen we could. On all of your bedded pack manures, your beef bedded pack manures, your dairy bedded pack, your sheep, horses, things like that. Generally, when you're using manure application, if you ever want to actually calculate your tons per acre that you're land applying, if you'll put out something that adds up to 56 inches by 56 inches, you'll find that that's 1/2,000th of an acre, for maybe the best way to put that. So on that tarp, if you get 5 pounds of manure, then you're getting 5 tons per acre as your application rate. If it's 10 pounds of manure on that tarp, then you're getting 10 tons per acre of your application rate. On all of your dry manures, you're going to have very little ammonia and nitrogen, because ammonium is a water soluble, and if there's no water to be absorbed by it, then it's going to basically gas off. And so all of your bedded barns and things like that, your ammonia is mostly getting away from you. You'll have in most pen pack manure, you'll have about 10 to 12 pounds of P2O5 and 10 to 12 pounds of K2O in a ton of bedded pack manure. And then your nitrogen varies. If it's scraped daily, like some small dairies still are, you might have as much as 30 units of nitrogen in a ton of this. More likely, if it's just straight bed pack manure, you'll more likely have somewhere around 10 pounds of organic nitrogen and very little ammonia nitrogen. So the 10 pounds of organic nitrogen would release slowly over a period of 4 or 5 years in a field. And that's why oftentimes when the manure is applied, people can see where that manure strip was in that field for several years, as there's a slow release of that organic nitrogen in there. The other uses of manure are the moisture. Many farmers have enough P2O5 or have enough K2O in their fields because of their history of manure. But the other thing you can do is you can use the liquid to germinate. So in this instance, this farmer had a field that was very dry. He'd taken the silage off. He planted triticale. He wasn't getting it to come up. So essentially he applied liquid manure right over top. And then the next day we dug down and the seeds were in moisture. They were beginning to swell up. So he had a good stand. And you could tell in that field exactly where that manure was applied. So those are the types of things. Again, many people don't think about the moisture in the manure, how I could actually use it, but that would be an example. And here would be another one. This is simply a dairy farmer. They planted this field to soybeans. They got a really poor emergence because it was dry. So they replanted it, and then they're having the dairy farmer or the commercial applicator come in and coat that field of soybeans with liquid manure. Now, it will kill anything that's emerged, but it will help provide moisture to sprout and get the other soybeans out of the ground. So we can do this with corn or wheat or soybeans for that matter. Corn's more tolerant once it's out of the ground than soybeans would. Usually soybeans do not like manure when they're emerged. But this is another example of where dry conditions impacted this field, where you've got some kernels of corn hit moisture and emerged fairly rapidly. Other kernels did not. They waited a couple weeks to get moisture. And then so you've got that uneven field, and the smaller ones are going to get outgrown by the taller ones, and they'll be shielded and you'll lose yield as a result. This is an example of just an irrigation equipment, and they're moving manure out of a sow unit. And sometimes you see this with the dairies as well. when they'll move a lot of low nutrient manure through some sort of a pivot irrigation system. So they'll swing this thing around and it'll put about 2/10 of an inch on when they do that. Then once it's completed, then they'll turn it on again and swing it back across and put another 2/10 on. So over the course of a week, you can get moisture on a field. And this happens to be a cornfield today. You can get the moisture to germinate and get things out of the ground. And that's a value of manure that many people overlook. I know it's cumbersome to haul the liquid, but there are other uses besides just being disgruntled by the amount they have to haul. When the other thing you look at economics, this is a farmer that when springs allow, he always tries to put manure down ahead of corn planting. Now, when you're using a drag hose like this, of course, you're going to run at a 45-degree angle across the field. And then this applicator is on 30-inch centers. So there'll be a gap between those strips of manure that should allow for excellent corn germination. You have to be careful about planting corn directly in to spring applied manure, because if you followed this applicator with your planter and you went on those manure rows when they were dry, you will really see an impact, a negative impact on germination and growth of corn planted directly into the manure strip. But this farmer is going to work this field. He's going to get this incorporated a little bit deeper. And then this itself, this rolling coulter design that he's using, is going to get it further underground. So when you look at that, the farmer has said he's done a number of strips with this over the years, and he feels very comfortable cutting back his total nitrogen use the following year on this upcoming corn crop by about 75%. So when you figure nitrogen at one point was about $1 a pound last year, if you were going to side dress or you were going to use a total of 180 pounds for the corn crop, that would have been $180, and be able to knock off 75% of that. We've certainly paid for the application of the manure. The other thing about it, if you're the producer, you're going to have to apply the manure at one point or another anyhow. So if you can get it applied in a way that you can utilize it, then the economics make a lot more sense. It's like getting your manure applied for free, because these cost savings in the fertilizer will certainly pay for the manure applicator himself. He's probably going to charge about 85 hundredths of a penny per gallon to do this. The other way we've seen a lot of people making use of manure is simply splattering swine finishing manure on top of wheat. There's lots of ways to do that. This is a farmer that simply goes out every spring. He has fairly forgiving soil, because again, that's a lot of weight to put out in the field. But he's simply top dressing wheat with liquid manure in about the first week of April. And he can replace all of his purchased fertilizer. So if he was going to buy 120 pounds per acre of commercial fertilizer, and again, if we used 70 cents a pound, then we would look at $84. And since he's going to apply the manure at some point, he can actually mark off the cost of what he would have paid for the purchased fertilizer. Now, he might still want to put fertilizer on the end rows and along the edge close to streams and ditches where you have to stay back with the manure, but it still works pretty well for the economic side. You do have tracks, but the yields are there. That's the important thing. But again, we don't like to see a lot of weight out on wheat fields if we can keep it. One of those ways to keep weight off is to use a drag hose. This is one that's got a coverage of about 60 foot. This is the first time out he'd ever used it, so he was overlapping more than he should have. But they're using sow gestation manure. So this farmer has a gestation unit. So he has, 1 million gallons of manure in storage there. And so this is an example of where he's able to apply at 10,000 gallons per acre, because he knows he has about 12 units of ammonium nitrogen per 1,000 gallons. So he's getting 120 pounds of nitrogen on this wheat in April, and he ended up with very, very good yield. So he'll tell you that every chance he gets that he can do manure on top of wheat out of his manure storage, he'll try to take advantage of that. And again, using the drag hose, we eliminate a lot of the concerns that we have with compaction across the field. Dairy manure on wheat. This wheat is a little bit light for collar. They aren't in a hurry because they're only going to do 1 or 2 applications. But this is one where this wheat's going to be chopped for wheat silage, or wheatleach. So they like not to splatter too much manure up on the leaves. This wheat is late. It's like V7 for application time. So that's later than we typically would like to go out. But for what they're going to do, these drop hoses that they're using is going to give them the ability to drop that manure directly on the soil, keep it off of the leaves of the plant. It's going to make it silane better if we don't get rain to wash it off anyhow between now and harvest time. You can see where it's leaving the manure directly on the soil surface where we've got a gap in the wheat field there. So you're going to apply the manure anyhow, but if you can put that on a wheat field and save the purchase of the top dress nitrogen, then it's kind of a win-win situation. And this would be one of those where the nutrient content is low enough they can put a second application on if they so chose to do that before it gets chopped. And then any leftover nutrients, nitrogen or whatever, will go toward whatever's planted in replace of this. So for most dairy farmers, it's going to be some sort of late corn for silage. Could also be soybeans, or it could be Sudan grass or whatever product they come up with. Now, probably the best use of the manure and the most economical use that we've found is to side dress corn. And we conducted a lot of trials back about 10 years ago with manure to find out how it would perform. And basically, we use liquid swine manure because that seems to be the most suitable one for corn, but you could do it with any of the other liquid manures as well. And essentially what we found out is that properly applied, and by that I mean subsurface applied like we did with here, if we can apply that, then we'll get excellent corn yields. Usually it'll out yield commercial fertilizer. It's nip and tuck with anhydrous ammonia, but out yields 28 pretty comfortably in most of our research trials that we did. And the key to making it work for farmers is they have to retrofit some of their equipment with rims and tires that are going to be suitable for going down corn rows. When we did this one with the university tanker, it cost about 10 grand to do that. So we have a Bowser tanker here. We have Dietrich sweeps on the back for side dressing corn. And then when you look at, these are Firestone payloader tires, and then Unreferred Manufacturing built the rims for us. So we made it all come together, and then we're able to use this in fields. And this spot on the right-hand side is where a farmer created his own equipment, put his own tires and narrow rims on. And we were just doing some side-by-side plots comparing what we were getting with our university tractor and what they were getting. This farmer happens to be using nursery manure because that's a source he has. He's got a nursery for a grower, so he ends up with about 1 million gallons of nursery manure and about 23 pounds of ammonium nitrogen per 1,000 gallons in that nursery manure. So it really is an excellent source, and he's making maximum use of it by replacing all of his side dress nitrogen with just using the nursery manure at about 7,500 gallons per acre, probably. When you look at manure in general, and this happens to be a swine sample, you know, we got 1,000 pounds is how you get an analysis back on liquid manures, pounds per 1,000 gallons, whereas dry manures like poultry or pen pack manure will always be pounds per ton. But in this example, we have about 37.68 pounds of total nitrogen in that swine manure, and almost all of that's in the ammonium form. So that's the neat thing about swine manure, is there's not a lot of organic nitrogen, it's mostly in the ammonium form. So there's our organic nitrogen in that sample, less than 2 pounds in 1,000 gallons. But we have our P2O5 and we have our K2O. And in this instance, I've even circled the sulfur. And just to point out that you've got a lot of nutrients, you've got values to those. Earlier we put 70 cents on nitrogen and 63 cents on K2 or P2O5, and the 38 cents on the K2O, I believe. But just know that when you look at swine manure, about 50% of that total value of those three big nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potash, is usually in the nitrogen form. So by just fall applying it and not counting on any of that nitrogen the following year, it is quite a waste, because oftentimes we can put out quite a bit of nitrogen with that fall applied manure. And you have a lot of micronutrients. But to put some values to that, yeah, on that sample that we just looked at, I put a value again on the ammonium nitrogen, the P2O5 and the K2O, and it comes out that that manure is worth about 4.4 cents per gallon if you do the liquid or capture the nitrogen portion and make use of it. If you don't, then you've greatly reduced the value of 1,000 gallons of that manure. So again, if nitrogen's captured, this would be about the value of good swine manure right now in the state of Ohio. Eventually, our research went from tankers to drag hoses. And this would be a good example. This is a Defiance County farmer who's drag hosing his 70-acre cornfield with liquid swine manure. You can see he's got what we call a drag hose or an umbilical cord. And basically, he's flattening that corn that this hose is dragging over top of. And has to be a pretty firm field. Has to be something that's stale seed beds, maybe a cover growing or killed cover crop, not been tilled. But if the seed bed's pretty firm, you can drag hoses across corn up to the V3 stage very comfortably. Actually, perhaps as much as the V4. But you can see he's basically doing his application. And so he's replacing all of his side dress fertilizer with just manure out of his pond. So he did, I think this field was right at 228 or 230 bushels when he did this 2 years ago. So he was pretty satisfied. And I think he's a person you'll see do this pretty frequently in the years ahead. He happened to have his own drag hose, and he just borrowed Ohio State's side dress equipment that we have. This would be an example of a farmer. He's putting corn on top, or manure on top corn at the V3 stage. Again, when we leave it on top of the ground, we're going to lose some of the nitrogen. But this is an example that's commonly done in Ohio where fields of corn are coated with either dairy manure or swine manure early in the spring. And you've got a growing crop that's going to grab those nutrients and going to run with them. So it's just a method of, you have to apply at some point. If you did this now, and then you could cut back on your purchase fertilizer, or you could wait till you harvest your wheat, put it out there in the summertime, and then it would go for no good unless you had a cover crop or something that could pick it up and run. This is what fields will look like after you've drag hosed them. If you look at them lengthwise, most people would say that's pretty acceptable. If you look at those things from the side, you can see where the drag hose went through. But again, still pretty acceptable. So I think most people are reasonably satisfied with the results that they're getting. And just a reminder that this is the stage at which corn can be drag hosed comfortably. This is a V3 corn. The first leaf out of the ground has a collar. The second leaf out of the ground has a collar. This third leaf has a collar. You can see the collar right here where it's gripping that plant, like you would grip the handle of a shovel or a hoe. And then these two leaves are not full leaves yet because they don't have a collar. If you're counting leaves as using the leaf collar method. So we could go to V4 and still be pretty comfortable with the results. So just to keep that in mind. And just a reminder, manure has a cost. You know, if you're a producer, you've got your expenses and equipment and time and possibly paying a commercial applicator to work with you. If you don't produce your own manure, but you're looking to source it from a neighbor, you also have expenses. You have expenses in getting equipment or getting the manure, you know, just trying to figure out the best way to use it. And I just emphasize at the bottom that if you can utilize the nitrogen and the liquid in addition to your P and K, but the nitrogen liquid, I think those are some of the best methods that you'll see a return on your investment for using manure. I think that's pretty much what I was going to talk about today. So I will stop sharing We do put a lot of information on Facebook, Ohio State Extension Environmental and Manure Management, if you ever want to go there and look at it.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Glenn. That was super informative. So now we're going to transition back to all three speakers and answer any questions that were in the Q&A. But first, I want to just let everyone know, when you exit this webinar, it's going to redirect you to a survey, and that is probably going to take about 2 minutes to complete. So if you wouldn't mind just filling that out for us, it'll give us a ton of valuable info. So before we get to our CCA credits and our wrap up, I saw there was one question in the Q&A for Katie that you answered. I didn't know if you wanted to talk through that a little bit. The question was, what items of expense and income are considered for net return for cover crops?
Yeah, yep. I think that was a very good question. So for income, for most farms, it was really production that they were seeing. So grazing or forage or something like that. So when there's a production aspect tied to it, and then any conservation payments they received. So whether that's a government payment or something from private sector, anything like that, those were the main sources of income for most cover crop farms, or most farms that were doing cover crops. But also included in that number was if there was any crop insurance income, hedging, or gains or losses that they associated again with the cover crop. So again, not income that's associated with the corn or soybeans or whatever other crop. This is directly only for the cover crop. So that's for income. And then expenses included any direct and indirect expenses that they associated again with the cover crop. So the cover crop seed expense, planting expense, fuel, depreciation, anything like fertilizer or chemicals that were associated specifically with the cover crop, crop insurance, anything like that.
Okay, so there's definitely a lot that goes into that. Along that same vein, I think this one could probably be both for Clint and Katie. What is the cost for farmers to do one of these farm analyses?
Yeah, so in Ohio, our cost point is right now $100 per analysis for just this entry level work. There are other features that we can do as far as cash flow projections and long range budgeting that we didn't really get into today, but there are more services we can offer. But we're at $100, and the reason that we can be at that price is we are federally funded with grants to get us to that level, and so we certainly appreciate that grant work that allows us to stay there. We've often estimated that to get this kind of level or financial analysis utilizing a private accountant, you're going to be anywhere between $1,200 to $1,500. So substantial cost savings for farms that want to participate through our program.
Okay. Same kind of vein there. I saw another question just came in. This one's for Glenn. How much does it cost to run an analysis on your manure?
Mostly, if you go to the local labs and stuff, probably about $40 to $45 for a manure analysis. And they can be very, very helpful, but it's just important to get one that's accurate. So a lot of times we suggest they pull analysis during the application process, and hopefully many livestock producers have multiple years of analysis so they can give you an idea of what their manure content is.
Okay. We got another one on that value for cover crops. So is there any income from capturing those nutrients or using those cover crops as a forage?
So we did capture partially the forage aspect of it, essentially, that we included in production. So, however many tons or whatever value they wanted to use there, we took the tonnage and then either if you're using it internally for your own feed, estimated the value of what you thought it would be worth, or if they sold it, then entering in the value there. So production, yes. In terms of, or forage, I should say, yes. In terms of nutrients, we don't directly account for, additional soil health benefits or anything like that is within the soil. We are solely only doing a financial analysis. And so kind of our behind the scenes way of doing that, or our goals essentially are, basically the thought is if there is additional soil health benefits being captured in the soil that we should be placing the economic value on, eventually we will see that, whether it is through increased yields of the cash crop that stem from the cover crop, or in decreasing inputs such as fertilizer or chemicals. So those are both things that aren't incurred, or we aren't going to see necessarily in year one, but hopefully as we continue to do this process, we will be able to see those impacts if they do exist. If there is an increase in yield, we'll see that come out in the economic value as the yield for the cash crop increases. If there's a decrease in fertilizer or chemicals applied, through the cover crop being a weed management system or something like that, hopefully we will eventually see that. But our thought was, we don't actually run soil tests or anything like that to grasp the specific increase in soil value there. So we are just capturing that through our financial analysis.
Perfect. I am going to take a second and pause our Q&A to put up the CCA credit slide. If you are a certified crop advisor and you have the app on your phone, you can go ahead and open that and scan this QR code with your phone camera. If you're having any issues getting your credits through the app, feel free to send me an email and I will make sure that you get those credits added manually. And I'm going to leave this up here for a minute while we continue with Q&A. So I have a question for Clint. What does the time commitment look like for farmers who are interested in working with you in your farm business program?
Yeah, and that's really going to be on a case-by-case basis as far as what their records look like. I don't know if Katie's had this experience in Minnesota, but just because a farm maybe has a fancy computerized record keeping system, that might not make the process any easier. We've got some farms that are still, very much using the old farm account books or paper and pencil, that their numbers are spot on, and that makes the process easy. And then, we also have some that are using a Quicken or a QuickBooks or, a digital record keeping system that, is very accurate and up to date. And so it's really going to depend on the farm. I think the biggest thing that we look at is that first year is always the most challenging because we're dealing with the beginning of the year balance sheet and an end of the year balance sheet. In subsequent years, you're only going to have to fill out the one balance sheet because the ending balance sheet from the first year is going to be your beginning balance sheet in year number 2. And so that really kind of reduces the level of time that's needed in those future years. So in general, if a farm has a good, accurate balance sheet and they have, whether it's computerized records or they make copies of their, record book or however they're keeping those and send that to one of our team, it can go pretty quick. The issue that we often run into is that accuracy check and getting that cash discrepancy under that $5,000 mark. That's where we can have a lot of back and forth and, searching or trying to do some of that forensic accounting and to figure out what was maybe missing. And that's where we see the biggest time commitment. But in general, if a farm has really good records, I've been able to sit down with the farm and do a complete analysis in 8 hours. And then, we've had some that it takes 8 months because there's a lot of back and forth and questions. So I wish I could give you a more specific answer, but that's kind of where we're at.
Yep. Well, it's the classic extension response of it depends.
Yep.
So I completely understand that. I neglected to mention that we are able to offer CLM credits for this webinar. So I did go ahead and launch that poll. If you are a CLM and you need those credits, go ahead and hit yes on that poll and we'll make sure that you get them. And we have just another minute here. So I'm going to go ahead and go to our closing slide. Just a reminder, there is going to be a survey that pops up as soon as you leave this webinar. It gives us a ton of useful info. If you can take 2 minutes to fill it out, we would really appreciate it. We have a team email for the water quality team. If you have any questions for us, you can email us at waterqualityassociates@osu.edu or visit our website that's here. And I really want to take a minute and thank our speakers for, spending this time with us this morning and sharing their expertise. If you have any questions for them following this webinar, feel free to reach out to myself or any of them. Their emails should be in the chat box somewhere. So again, thank you all, and I'll give a second for each of the speakers to give any closing thoughts that they might have.
Just appreciate being here today.
All right, well, thank you so much. That'll do it for us today, and we hope to see you next month for our water management techniques webinar. So with that, thank you very much. Thank you, guys. I'll send a follow-up email with all the info. And